Right, we are recording and welcome everybody. We are so excited you are here for Mapping the Road to Success, intersection of language and content. I'm going to read the description of the course just so you can make sure you're in the right place today. These are ESL teachers and we are participating. Participants will identify the ways in which language and content interact and work together for academic success. Participants will explore both content area standards and English language development standards to recognize the correlations between them. In addition, participants will collaborate with colleagues to apply their knowledge of the mapping documents to classroom and school curriculum planning. So we are so excited to have you here today to explore our mapping document. And we are also very excited to have Crystal Jablatsky with us. So some of you may know her, but let me tell you just a little bit about her. Crystal is the lead ESL teacher and instructional facilitator for secondary schools in Lee County, North Carolina. She provides professional development and coaching for content and ESL teachers in the SIOP method, differentiation for L's, vocabulary building for L's, MLs, as we're moving to by July 1, and various components of Margarita Calderon's Excel methodology. She's also a certified trainer for OCDE Project GLAD, which I know many of you have had the opportunity to learn about. Crystal helps create classrooms that allow English language learners to be successful and flourish in the schools in her county, as well as across the state, as part of our EL support team. She has a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a North Carolina teaching license for grades 9 through 12 in the area of social studies from Fayetteville State University, a master's degree in education with a concentration in ESL from Meredith College, and was nationally board certified from 2005 to 2015. And I'll tell you, she doesn't look like it, but she has over 20 years of classroom experience in both elementary and secondary education and is all around amazing. So I tell you all this stuff just so you know who we are learning from today. I'll be here to support. I do want to encourage you guys, if you want to turn on your cameras, feel free to do that. But also pay attention to whether or not your camera is on. So there's one person that's kind of moving around a lot. I'm not sure if they know that their camera is on. So do check your cameras. Be aware that your camera is on and that you can be seen, or make sure that you've got it turned off. So thank you again for being with us. And with that, Chrissy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ivana, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, my ESL teachers who are all joining us today for this session. I'm super excited to be able to present this session of Mapping the Road to Success, the intersection of content and language. And in this session, we're going to explore the ELD standards framework and the mapping document that was created to support their implementation. So as Ivana reminded you previously, you do have a conference notebook that you might want to open up, or if you haven't downloaded one yet, you may want to download it. These have artifacts and links that we'll be assessing or accessing during the training. Also, some districts may be asking for artifacts or within these notebooks for CEU credit. Again, Ivana did a great job of introducing me. Just want to say I'm super excited about being able to present this training, because this allows me to combine my two loves, social studies and ESL, which I don't always get to do. So I'm super excited to be here and to be able to do that. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start by looking at our session objectives. By the end of this session, we're hoping you'll be able to state the purpose, format, and content and location of the mapping document itself, that you'll be able to define the key language uses in a variety of ways, that you'll be able to use the mapping document to plan for integrated instruction in the classroom, and that you'll be able to write an integrated content and language objective. So we're going to begin with just a quick overview of the ELD standards that the mapping document was created to support. One of the big ideas within the ELD standards is the idea of collaboration. So we just want to take a quick poll about how much time you spend collaborating with your content specialist at your school. So I'm going to ask you to read. Do you spend an hour a week, an hour a month, 1 hour a semester, less than an hour a semester, or do you not have the opportunity to collaborate with your content colleagues? You'll take a minute, and in the chat box, if you'll just enter A, B, C, D, or E. Okay, I'm seeing some.
Yeah, our first response was an E. Okay, you don't have that opportunity.
I'm seeing it. Well, I'm seeing several E's and D's, some A's and B's, which is wonderful. So we have a whole gamut, it looks like, of answers, and it looks like they range anywhere from being able to spend 1 hour a week, which is absolutely wonderful, all the way down to I don't have the opportunity to collaborate with your colleagues. And some of us are right there in the middle, maybe an hour or so, a semester. So what are we want to take a moment to ask you to think about what are the challenges that prevent you from collaborating with your content specialist colleagues? So what challenges do you face that help prevent that? Seeing time pop up, and that has been a common one throughout all of our sessions this week. Okay, multiple teaching scenarios, being at several schools. Okay, too many roles to fill. Too many schools to participate in. Okay, so it's looking like many of us are saying that, our plates are kind of full. Our schedules don't always match. And then the one that Ms. Johnson just put in there, differing opinions and approaches. And so sometimes, and that's one of the things that we're hoping that the mapping document will help to make better, improve upon, is this, that when we come together as ESL specialists, we're coming with a particular skill set and a particular perspective. And our content colleagues sometimes are coming with different perspectives and different skill set. And sometimes it's hard to meet in the middle. Well, the mapping document, the goal of the mapping document is to help us find that middle ground so we can begin our conversations. So thank you so much for sharing those challenges with me. Now, as I said, the mapping document was created to support the North Carolina ELD standards. And in particular, there are two big ideas that the mapping document will support. The first one is integration. And this is that idea that content classrooms and English language development classrooms should be teaching integrated lessons. So I should see language and content together in instruction. The second big idea that the mapping document is going to target is that collaboration, which we just spoke about. And as I said previously, that collaboration is going to really be a starting point. So it's going to give us a place to start our discussion and our conversation and our talks to help get those ideas flowing and move toward that integrated instruction. So we want to take just a quick look at the North Carolina language expectations and identify some of the major pieces or components of that. So as we move forward, we're familiar with those. The first thing you'll notice is the language expectations there, and these are similar to content standards. They are the language expectations or the language standards within the English language development standards. You'll also notice that in the nomenclature or in the coding, you'll see that the coding provides the grade level cluster. This one is grade 6 to 8. It also provides that key language use, which we'll be exploring some. This one happens to be narrate. It'll provide that mode of communication, which is interpretive. Now, I want to take a moment also to talk about that mode of communication. We will use these when we begin to start making our objectives. So I want to make sure we have a clear understanding. So there are two modes of communication in the ELD standards. They're expressive and interpretive. The interpretive The interpretive mode of communication involves receiving language, so it would involve listening, reading, and the standards also include that idea of viewing, that multiple modality of viewing as a way to access language. And this involves the understanding and the interpretation of the language that is being received. The second mode of communication is the expressive, and this is where we are producing language. And this is going to involve speaking and writing. And again, the new standards have included representing as a way of expressing our ideas and producing meaningful language. Now let's take a second and look at the North Carolina mapping document. One of our goals is to become familiar with this document and be able to use it in our planning. So this is what we're going to explore. So the mapping document is located on the North Carolina ELD Standards Resource Hub. Ivana can place the link in the chat box for you. Go ahead and click on that. Go ahead and click on that hub. And I'm just going to ask that you leave this hub up because we will be referencing it throughout the presentation. You'll see the mapping icon here. You click on that mapping icon. It's going to take you to the 5 mapping documents. There is a mapping document for each of the ELD standard statements, the language of social instructional purpose, the language of language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies, which used to be the standards that we used and identified in the classroom. Now we have more specific language expectations attached to them. So if you'll leave this tab open, and we will come back to that a couple of times during the presentation, that way it'll be easily accessible. So briefly, as we look at the document, the purpose of the mapping document is really to allow language specialists and content teachers to see how their standards work together in a lesson. So the mapping document is going to show places where language expectations and grade level content standards correspond with one another. So let's take a look at the format of the mapping document. So the first column is going to be our language expectation. Remember that the language expectation has the coding or the nomenclature that's going to show the standard, which is English Language Development Standard of Language Arts, the grade level span, the key language use, and our mode of communication. And then to the right, you're going to see our grade level or specific course content standards matched up. So you'll see that we have the grade level, which is we see grade 2 and grade 3. And then under each of those columns, are these specific content standards that will work well with this language expectation. Now, just a reminder that these are examples and it's not a complete list. So every language, every content standard that may match a language expectation may not be present, but it's a very good start. So what I'd like to do now is just become familiar with the document. And I'm going to ask you to walk through the document with me. And as we walk through, I'm going to ask you to go the places I go. And at the very end, I'm going to ask you to post something for me in the chat box, which will let me know that you are able to navigate the document and make your way through it, because we want to be familiar with it. Okay, so I'm going to ask that, again, you go to your mapping document. So click on your mapping document here. Somebody asked about, I see a question about RL. So RL is part, it means reading literature. It means reading literature. It's a reading standard that involves literature. So as we look here, I'm going to ask that you click on the ELD Standard 3, which is the language of mathematics. And I'm going to also call your attention to the fact that if you download this document, which I like to do, you download the document and open it, there are links that will allow you to kind of jump around in the document to the specific place you'd like to go. So as I move down here to page 2, at the top of the page, you see links to the grade level spans. So this is really handy if you have it downloaded to be able to navigate. So we want to go to 2nd grade. So I'd like you to go to the 2nd grade standards. And you can either scroll, or if you've downloaded, you can click on that link. Now I want to locate a language expectation for the key language use of explain. So the first one actually happens to be explain. See right here. Now I want to find a language expectation that has an expressive mode of communication. So I see here I have interpretive. So I would like an expressive one. So I'm going to ask you just to scroll down until you find an expressive language expectation. So now what I'd like you to do is look for a math content standard that you can connect to your language expectation. So you see here I have a language expectation, here I have a language expectation, both of which are explain and expressive. And then I see 2nd grade here are some content standards that will work very well with those language expectations. So what I'd like to ask you to do at this moment is I'd like you to copy and paste your content objective into the chat box, but do not hit send. We're going to do a chat blast. So copy and paste your content standard, 2nd grade content standard that you found that correlates or matches one of those language expectations. Copy it and paste it into the chat box, and then when you see the chat blast pop up, I'm going to ask you to send it. I'll give you just a sec. Okay, hit send. Oh, I see them popping up. Wonderful. Wonderful. You guys did a great job. And that lets me know that you were able to navigate that document with me, because that's the first step in being able to use it effectively. Any questions about the format of the mapping document or anything that we've reviewed at this point before we move forward? Okay, I am not seeing any questions. So I'm going to pop back here. We're going to move on to taking a look at the language of the content standards. As ESL teachers, we teach through the language of the content, as is represented by those WIDA ELD standard statements. And so what we're going to do is take a look at what that language is. So you can see here, the key language uses, just a brief mention, and we're going to explore them a little more here. The key language uses are the 4 most common language uses in the K-12 content curriculum. So these are the 4 language uses that show up most frequently in K-12 standards. They're narrate, inform, explain, and argue. And they are really that first opportunity to connect the language and the content. So we want to make sure that we feel comfortable with those key language uses. Now, some of the connections, as we began to create this document, we realized, okay, some of the connections seemed fairly simple. And then there were other connections that were more difficult to make. And so if we look at this standard here, this math standard here, you can see that I clearly see the word explain in my content standard. So clearly, this matches with the key language use of explain. Not all of the standards will match that easily. And it's also important to remember that just because the verb is explain, that does not mean that other key language uses will not be involved. For example, if we look at our Venn diagram, we see that all of the key language uses overlap in some area. And this is because oftentimes when we're explaining, in the course of explaining something, we may also need to inform. For example, with this standard, I'm being asked to explain how to solve an addition or substitution problem. However, in the course of that, I might need to inform students about how to line their numbers up. I might need to inform students about how to carry over a number. Okay, so sometimes the key language uses kind of overlap. So that's important to be aware of. Now let's look at a content standard where the key language use is not so clear. So in many of the content standards, the connection we saw was not as explicit. So in the math standards, the verb here do not match any of our key language uses. We see compare and we see recognize. Therefore, it's really, really important for us to be very familiar with each of those key language use, those genres, so that we can make these connections when we need to between the content and the language expectation. So we're going to dive into those key language uses. We're going to, I'm going to ask Ivana if she will put the Padlet link into the chat box. I'm going to ask you to join me on our Padlet. Okay, so if you look at our Padlet, you'll notice that across the top of the Padlet, we have each of the 4 key language uses. And what we're going to do is we're going to dive a little deeper into those key language uses and look at some specific, we're going to look more specifically at them. So we're going to start with narrate. We're going to walk through some, and then I'm going to leave it open to you to add what you know, your knowledge set about each of these key language uses. So if you look at our first one, you'll see narrate, and you'll see our first category is purpose. So I'll need to scroll, and you'll see that we have had lots of participants add already, and we decided to leave their ideas so that you have a really deep understanding. Not only do you have your understanding, but you have those of other participants who have added all week long. So you'll need to scroll down till you see the add a comment box. And as I'm thinking about the purpose of narrate, what is the purpose of narrate? Well, you can see here that some people have put it's to connect, it's to recount an event, it's to give your point of view. So I'm going to ask that you take a moment, click and add a comment. Think about what you think the purpose of narrate is. So take a moment and just add a few ideas to that category under narrate. So I'm seeing a lot of people share verbs: to tell, to speak, to communicate, stories, histories. These are all words that might help us match. We might see them in standards. They might help us match our content objective with our language expectation. Sequential order, reasoning. Wonderful ideas. Okay, let's move on to associated words. So these are words, they might be verbs, they might be nouns, words that you associate with the narrate language use. So you can see here we have some people who wrote story sequence, someone who wrote beginning, middle, and end, details. We see sequencing again, point of view, journals. So take a moment, scroll down to the end of our list, and you can take a moment to review some and add some ideas you associate with. See events, poetry, drama, story maps. Ah, I love it. Rising action, climax, falling action, plays. Oh, you guys are doing an awesome job. Details, absolutely. Processes, yes. So you guys did a great job with that. Let's go down to examples. So these are specific examples that you might see. So you see our first response is autobiographies, memoirs, fairy tales. As a history teacher, the first one I thought of was a diary entry. So take a moment and just add some examples of text that might be narrative or that narrate. Historical fiction. Primary sources, yes. Folk tales, parables. Oh my gosh, we are getting such an awesome, wide set of ideas. Wonderful responses. And now our last category we're going to move to are classroom activities. And so how do you see, what types of activities do you use when you are addressing the key language use of narrate? So take a moment, scroll down, and if you'll just add some ideas. You see some people had comic strips, timelines, story maps, oral storytelling, graphic organizers. Summaries, yes, absolutely. Read aloud, sharing personal events. Okay, you guys did a great job with that one. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just turn you loose on the Padlet for about maybe 4 minutes. And I'm going to let you kind of see what's been added to each of the categories and ask you to add to our list. So take about 4 minutes and explore the Padlet and add some ideas for us that might help us make connections. So I'm seeing in the chat box also a question, is there a chart in the mapping document with this kind of information and examples? And no, there is not. However, that's one of the reasons we wanted to use the Padlet so that you'll have access to this. However, the WIDA manual that we will be sharing the PDF for does have some really good resources for key language uses that dive a little deeper. So I'm going to give you your time, and if you need anything, we'll monitor the chat box. Give us your great ideas. Okay, so I have been watching our responses. I'm seeing lots of great ideas being added to the Padlet. This is going to be a great resource as you start looking at, as you start kind of diving into those language uses. This is going to be some great ideas here. So wonderful job. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. We're going to go back now and we're going to look at one final piece here of that content language use. So within, so just want to take a moment to talk about the key language uses as a whole. Those are, again, the most prominent language uses found in the K-12 content standards. Notice that and here's an example of a distribution table, and these can be found in the WIDA manual that we'll share a little later on. They can be found in there. You can see that this one is for, you're going to see across the top, you see your key language uses: narrate, inform, explain, and argue. Going to see that this is the key language use for first grade. You see down the side in that first column what are our standard statements, our general standard statements. And then you'll notice that in each row there are a series of dots. So a completely darkened dot shows that that language use is most prominent. That means that it shows up very frequently in the content standards. So in first grade mathematics content standards, the inform key language use is there very, very often. You may also notice that there are circles that are partially blackened or darkened in, and these are prominent. That means that they show up somewhat frequently. And then you'll notice that there are some dots or circles that are not filled in at all. And those circles that are not filled in at all show that that key language use is present. And that means that it's there, but it's not there very, very heavily. It's infrequently there. So for the language expectations, the ELD standards focus on the language expectations for those key language uses that are most prominent. So on our chart here, where you see the completely bubbled in dark circle, those will be the key language uses that you will see language expectations for in the ELD standards. The ones that are partially filled in or not filled in at all will not be targeted in the language expectations. So let's take a minute and look at the language of science. The language of science. Take a look at that row. Which key language uses will there be language expectations for? Take a moment and type in the chat box for me. Which key language uses will there be language expectations for? Go ahead and just send them when you get them in there. Okay, I'm seeing lots of inform and explain. Absolutely. Okay, now I did see argue. Argue is only a partially filled in circle, and that means they're prominent, but those are not included in the language expectations. Only the ones that are completely darkened in. So you guys did a great job with that. Thank you. And you were right, inform and explain. So now we're going to move forward and we're going to look at the North Carolina mapping document, and we're going to try to find connections between the content and the language. So we are going to try to locate our targets for our lessons. So we're going to decide on the content focus for our lesson. In this case, we're going to select the mapping document that belongs to science. So on your mapping documents, you'll see the language of science, which is ELD Standard 4. We're going to click on that, and we are going to select our mapping document. The next thing we'll do is we'll scroll all the way down to the 4th grade section. And then we're going to locate the language function that we wish to teach, and we're going to find our language expectation. So as ESL teachers, we're going to begin with the language and not with the content. So we're going to begin with that left-hand column, and we're going to look for a language function or a language expectation that matches our students, that's appropriate for grade level and language level for our students. So when I talk about the language function, I am talking about the piece of the language expectation that follows the colon. So construct scientific explanations that what follows after the colon is our language function. And language functions are specific patterns that are associated with each of the key language use genres. Okay, specific patterns. So we're going to select our language function. So in this case, we want our students to be able to describe observations or data. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to select a content standard that we want to teach that language through. In this case, I selected that we want to teach it through explaining how minerals are identified. We're going to test them with physical properties. So what I've done at this point is I have matched up my 2 objectives. Now I am ready to plan my instruction because I have my language expectation, which is in fact my language target or objective, and then I have a science content objective that will work very nicely with it. And this is what the mapping document does for us, helps us do. So what we're going to do now is, in our notebooks, there is a artifact, a participant artifact that we'll be working throughout the session. Ivana, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat box in case you don't have your notebook pulled up. Ivana has just put that into the chat box. Okay, thank you, Ivana. So if you'll click on that, what you'll pull up looks like this. And there's a place for you to copy and paste your English language development standard or your language expectation. And there's a place for you to copy and paste your content standard and their objectives. So for the one we just did, would paste or type in my language expectation here, and then I would type in my objective. Now, just for the sake of time, I did not put the whole standard here. I just used a specific objective that fell under it here. Any questions about that process? If there are no questions, what I'd like for you to do is I'm going to give you about maybe about 5 minutes. I want you to go back to choose a content standard, just like we did, follow the same process. Choose a content standard that you want to teach through. Select that mapping document and find a correlating content standard to match a language expectation that you would like to teach. Okay, so there is, I'm seeing someone ask about the artifact. If you went to the artifact in your notebook, it's linked up at the top in the little descriptor. Okay, and if you're struggling with that, the link that Ivana put in there will take you straight to where you can make a copy. Okay, so let me just take you through here. When you click on that link that Ivana put in there, you should click on Make a Copy. If the one in the notebook, we did struggle the first day with the one in the notebook, and that's why we posted it in the chat box. So if you're having a problem with the notebook one, just click on Make a Copy for the one that Ivana shared, and it should take you straight there. And this should, once you've made a copy, you should be able to type in it. And so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to practice that process, because that's the very beginning of getting our planning going with our content peers, and the beginning of getting our ESL ELD lesson prepared so we can teach through that content. So a lot of questions about the notebook. If you are struggling with the notebook, we are going to paste all of the links in the chat box. So if you're having a problem with the notebook, then just click on the link in the chat box, and maybe Ivana can share that link in the chat box again. That'll take you right to the document. So in the interest of time. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. Thank you. I'm seeing got it. Great. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, and we're going to come back and see if we have any questions and see how successful we've been at matching those 2 objectives or targets. Please let me know if you need any support in the chat box. Okay, that our 5 minutes is up. Anybody want to just comment? How successful were you at being able to match? If you want to comment in the chat box, how successful were you at being able to match your content standard and your language expectation? Or any questions about that process that I can clarify? So I hear someone say we're only doing 1 or 2. Yes, absolutely.
Crystal, can I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
So in a perfect world, if we can't go to PLCs, would we ask our grade level chairs or our teams to send us the content standards that they're working on in a particular unit of study, like science or social studies, or even like math or English and language arts? And then we can go ahead and try to match our ELD standards from there, just because we can't be on every PLC if we have students.
Absolutely, that's an excellent idea, and there will be places as we move through this artifact where I'll share a couple places where you might be able to collaborate electronically and help your content teacher with their integration. But absolutely, that's an excellent idea. Contacting your content PLC or content teacher and saying, hey, what standards are you on? Absolutely. And then going to your mapping document and saying, okay, let me see, here's that content standard, and here are the language expectations that I can work on with my kids or my students.
Awesome. And then we can kind of push them out to the teachers, because so often they're like, we don't know what you're working on, even though we're trying to match what they're doing. We can share our language expectations so they have similar expectations in the classroom.
Absolutely, that's a wonderful idea. We have to collaborate in a variety of ways because there are lots of demands on our time and our schedules. So thank you for sharing that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing.
Sorry, Chrissy, this is Ivana. I was just going to jump in and say, since she brought up the idea of the content teachers, we do tomorrow have a session for mapping that is specific for content teachers. I just put the registration link into the chat box. If you have content teachers that you work with regularly or that you think would be willing to join us, we would love to have them come tomorrow and work with us through these materials from the content lens. Sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to share that.
No, thank you very much for reminding us of that. And there are places as we walk through this, and we will share that tomorrow with our content colleagues as well. There are places where when we start talking about the objectives and their integration of language into the classroom, there are some specific places that they would probably need their ESL teacher support. And we'll talk about that a little further down, where you might be able to just support through a Google Doc or support through, electronically. So we will talk about that. So thank you so much. And we are super excited about our content colleagues who are joining us tomorrow as well. So we're going to move, I don't see any questions. We're going to move ahead. And we're going to look at planning for language development. So as ESL teachers, we've got our language expectation. We know the content we're going to teach through, but we have to plan for the specific pieces of language that we are going to target. And those are the language features that we're going to teach to our multilingual learners. So that's what we're going to address in this session, or this section. So I want to take a minute, and it's in our next couple of sections as we move toward trying to create a language objective or an integrated language objective. It's really important that we understand the pieces of a language expectation, or what I'm going to call the language expectation anatomy. So if we look here, you're going to see that in purple, we have what is referred to as the stem. And the stem is going to include some important pieces of information for us. So the stem is going to tell us about the mode of communication. We see the word construct, so that lets me know that we're producing or creating. So that would be my expressive mode. It's going to also tell me the content area of the standard language arts. And then it's going to tell me the key language use. And in this case, it tells us it's narratives. So we know that it's the key language use of narrate. So that's our STEM. The second piece of the language expectation is the language function. And we know that a language function is the specific pattern or specific characteristics that are associated with the key language use. So in this case, if we're talking about narrate, you see we're talking about narratives. So what pattern would we see linguistically? We would see time, event sequences, conflict, resolution, and then of course the ending. So that's our language function. And then you're going to see the final piece, which is the language feature. And this is the specific grammar structures or language resources. These are the specific pieces of language that our students will need to know and be taught to be able to accomplish that language function. So if I'm going to develop a story about with time and event sequences, if I'm going to develop a story that talks about events, I have to have verbs that help describe what characters are doing in those events. So those are the three pieces of a language expectation, and we're going to be referencing them as we move forward with our final two goals for this session, which are to make an integrated content and language standard, and we want to be able to target some specific language features. So again, just to review, language features to me, this is one of the areas for me and in my work here in my county. These are one of the places where I will feel, where I feel my content teachers are going to need a lot of support. And so this might be the place where when we teach our content peers how to make that integrated objective, they might need some collaboration with their ESL specialist. What features can I target? Because this is the more complicated piece of that puzzle. And again, those are going to be things like types of sentences, clauses, phrases, or maybe even specific technical vocabulary that students will need. So let's look at how all these pieces work together. So here is the English Language Arts Mapping document, an excerpt from it. We're going to see that we have a second grade content standard, which is to describe how a story, a character in a story responds to events and conflicts or challenges. This standard can be easily connected to the language expectation here. Develop a story with time and event sequences. So in my ELA lesson, I'm going to target both of these skills, but I need to determine the language features that will need to be taught or developed to accomplish this. So what we're asking ourselves is what specific information or language skills will be needed by our students to achieve that language function. So in order to do that, there are a couple ways that you can identify language features. Some ESL teachers are more comfortable with them than others. So I just wanted to take a moment and talk about how we can target these key language features, and maybe how we can share with our content colleagues ways they might be able to do that. So one of the best ways to target, to find language features for me is to find a sample of that text, a sample text that uses that key language use. So for example, here I have a sample narrative. Taking a sample text or a sample narrative and going through and looking for what are the really important pieces or language structures in that sample that my multilingual learners will need to know. I often tell content teachers to write theirs. So write the perfect response, or what is the perfect response to that discussion question. And then we go through and we dissect it and we find those language features, those pieces that we need to really target for our multilingual learners. So let's take a look at this writing sample and see if we can identify some language features. So if we look at the first part of so our language function says we want to effectively convey time and event sequences. So it's necessary for us to have sequencing connectors that communicate how time is passing. So you see then and next here. First might be one you target. We also know that to effectively convey events and conflicts that have an impact on the character, we're going to have to use verbs that describe characters and what they do, think, or feel. So here you see some examples: rises, thinks, dresses, arrives. So we might target that as a language feature. Another language feature we might target is that in order to convey our resolution and our conflict, we have to use verbs and adjectives that help the reader judge behavior and situations. So you see here, like it's buzzing with talk, or it's noisy, or they're excited. So these are just a few examples of language features, and this is one way you might be able to identify language features, because that is the piece of the puzzle that our mapping document does not give. So it allows you to correlate, and we're going to see how it's used with an objective, an integrated objective, but it doesn't provide those language features. So this is an important thing to be able to do and to be able to help our content peers do. So we're going to try one together with an excerpt from the math mapping document. So take a look at this standard. This is an excerpt. It's a math mapping document that deals with the key language use of argue. It's 2nd grade. We see our content standard is to compare 2- and 3-digit numbers using place value, also using mathematical symbols of greater than, less than, or equal to. This standard is connected to the language expectation that asks students to construct mathematical arguments that generalize commonalities across cases. The first thing we've done is we have our 2 correlated objectives. Now, I'm going to ask you to think about what aspects of language will your students need to generalize commonalities. So we're talking about comparing and finding similarities. So what language structures might be needed to do this? So take a moment, and then I'm going to ask you to just reflect on the question. Take a moment, and then if you'll enter your ideas in the chat box. What language features, what language structures are going to be necessary for our multilingual learners? See, transition words. Okay, I see the question, does the WIDA manual provide them? Yes, it does. It gives some sample ones, which we're going to look at in a minute. If then, absolutely. Other ideas? Comparative adjectives. Something is the same as. Wonderful. Any other ideas? Comparison words. So I'm going to share with you, I see several ones. You guys did a great job with that. So the ones that I came up that we might talk about were comparatives. So larger than, bigger than, biggest, most, or more. I also identified demonstrative. So we might have to say these or that to point out specific aspects. And then I also identified the same one you shared, which were conditional structures. If, then, or when, to help us draw some conclusions. I see a lot, now we've got a whole bunch being added in here, I'm seeing. Math operation words like all, precise vocabulary or language more than, less than, equal to, I'm seeing show up. Okay. I saw someone say maybe just numbers beginning on, remember, we're choosing our language features and our language expectations based on what's appropriate for the grade level and for the level of our students' language proficiency. So you guys did great with that. So now I'm going to let you practice on your own and try this on your own. And the way we're going to do this is that we are going to share a Jamboard in the chat box. Ivana will put that in the chat box for us. Well, let me stop here before we do that. Ivana's going to put that in the chat box. But are there any questions so far about anything we've talked about? The language features, the function, how they work together?
And it was already in the chat box, so I hope I'm not ahead of you.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. I'm sorry. Okay, she put the Jamboard in the chat box. And I'm just checking to make sure we don't have any questions.
I did have a question earlier asking if the WIDA manual provides, I think it was the language.
Yeah, I think it was the language features.
Features, yeah.
Yeah, and so we are going to, I'm going to share those pages and where you might find them. And in just a moment, they do provide sample ones. They will not have them for all of the language expectations, but the manual itself will provide you with a couple sample ones for mainly the expressive modes of communication expectations. That's a great question. Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So if you've opened up your Jamboard and you have your own personal Jamboard, just to make this, to give you opportunity to practice individually. And what I'm going to ask you to do is on your Jamboard, you'll have to make a copy. You'll just scroll over. You're going to see that this is a, there are, sorry, I went too far. You see you have a language expectation for language arts, one for math here. And then I have some sticky notes that have language features. And these did come from the WIDA manual. So I'm going to ask you to take a minute on your own personal Jamboard and see if you can match up the two features that would partner with my language arts and the two features that would partner with my math. There is also another one if you want to give it a shot on page 4 of the Jamboard, and these are science and social studies. Saw someone ask earlier, were we going to access science any? And I tried to include as many different content areas for us to practice with as possible. So you could switch to go to slide 4 after you do the first one. So let's take just a few minutes. I'm going to give maybe let's say 3 or 4 minutes for you to try to match those up. And then we're going to come back. Let's say 3 minutes because you guys are my experts on this. We'll do about 3 minutes for you to match those up. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to give you the opportunity to share how you match them and to explain the matching that you did. Okay. So let's take about 3 minutes. And if you have any questions or need any support, Ivana and I will be watching that chat box.
Crystal, we do have a few people that are still struggling to open the Jamboard. Any thoughts? We had that problem yesterday with some people that were on phones or maybe iPads. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
Thank you. I apologize. Sometimes the Chromebooks sometimes interact with WebEx oddly. I'm not sure. I'm going to post my link in there and see if it does any better.
And there shouldn't be any issue with number because people should be making a copy, so everyone should have their own, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely. It's all
Thank you.
push copy. I put another link in there. I would say if that link you struggle with making a copy with that link, I would say just it's projected on the screen. Think about how you would match them. And when we come back, we can share out. I apologize if there's a struggle with that. I think it does interact differently with different computers, different types of computers. Like I said, I know in the past we've had problems with Chromebook, and I'm sure on a phone it would be difficult. I'm not sure about an iPad, but it may be the device.
I hope we didn't disturb people too much. I'm sorry for interrupting the quiet. So I'm going to disrupt the quiet again. Chrissy, I can't tell if you're frozen or if you're just intently looking at something, but I think we had said 3 minutes, and it's been a
Okay.
bit more than that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I was just browsing the chat box to make sure to see if we were being any more successful. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Ivana. So what we're going to do is let's just take a look and see how we match these. So anyone want to unmute and share? You can either type your name in the chat box or raise your hand if you'd like to share how you matched the stickies with how you match the features with the expectations. Anybody who'd like to give it a try? Okay. Everybody wants to give it a shot? Okay.
I'll try.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for volunteering.
So for number one, I moved prepositional phrases to describe place and location. And then next to that was signal words to show comparisons. Then number three was causal connectors to present case to others. And number 4, I thought was technical nouns to add precision and details.
Absolutely, 100% correct. Thank you for sharing them. Does anybody want an explanation for any of those? Maybe if you would share, could you share your thinking on maybe one or two that you matched?
I'm not hearing her. She's talking.
Did you want me to do that?
Yeah, would you mind sharing
Okay.
just your thinking maybe on the first language expectation?
Well, I don't know. As I typed in the chat, I was, kind of back and forth on what exactly I was doing. So I don't know if I really know. But the first one says add details. So prepositional phrases are good for adding details to writing. So that's why I put that one there. And then bigger than, fastest, and all those signal words to show comparisons, we're adding details.
You did beautifully. So you did it exactly correct. Lovely explanation. Absolutely. So, and that shows you that her explanation shows you, because I saw someone asking in the chat box, it shows you how these work together. So that language feature is helping us accomplish this function. This language feature is helping us accomplish this function. Okay, so you did a great job. Thank you so much for sharing. Now I see some people saying, well, I had the signal words for the math one. So I think it's Miss Adams. Miss Adams, so do you want to take just a minute and maybe share your reasoning?
I put that one, the signal words for the math, only because it had the bigger than and the math terms in it.
Okay, so you see bigger than. Okay, so yesterday we had that, and there will be some cases where language features will be similar. So I can understand your thinking, absolutely. And so it is possible that it might match up with that. I think the key here is that justify piece. So, trying to justify, well, but you could use bigger. I see what you're saying. You could use bigger than to justify some of your patterns. So absolutely, I think that one works well there as well.
So these are interchangeable?
Well, you will have those language features will be, as I said, language features can be matched to different language functions. And it's possible for a language feature to also match more than one purpose, if that makes sense.
Okay, because excuse me, I'm sorry. I wanted to say that I had put the technical nouns with the informational text because it said that you add details to define and describe, and this adds precision and details. So I thought the technical nouns could go up there. I had those, and then I had the prepositional phrases down at math, because if you're talking about a pattern, you've got the first, the second, this one's next to that one, this one's before that one. So to me, that seemed like it would fit with the math if you're talking about patterns.
Yes, so absolutely. I think that you did all of the justifications that you're sharing for why you place features where they go are appropriate, because what you're doing is you're matching that feature to the words and to the function you see right here. And if that is something that is needed to achieve that function, then it is appropriate. So yes, there can be overlaps. I like how that was phrased in the chat box. Absolutely. And remember, we said that even with our key language uses, there are going to be overlaps there as well. So it's not that we can only teach prepositional phrases with this one language expectation.
I'm just going to jump in. Oh, sorry, you breathed. I'm just going to jump in and say this is the perfect time to remind you guys of our office hours from 3:30 to 4:30. Yesterday, we had an amazing session with questions just like that, digging deeper and really having an hour with a smaller group to really get to pick Chrissy's brain. So I'm just looking at our time and want to keep us moving along. But thank you. I love that question, and I hope that you'll be able to make it to office hours and we can keep digging into that.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So hopefully we're in kind of a good place with that understanding. Let's look here what I wanted to show you was the final component. So if we take our pieces here, we can transfer them into, we have now all of the pieces that we need to make an integrated language and content objective. We have identified our STEM, our language function, our feature, and then we can use our mapping document to identify our content standard. So we have identified all of our pieces. Our STEM here comes right here, from right here. Construct informational text. Okay, our language function is right after the colon. And then our features we came up with, and in this case, they were our yellow stickies. So once we have completed this little foursquare, we are going to have everything we need to proceed to our final goal, which is to create an integrated content language objective. Okay, really quickly, comprehension check. Just type in the chat box how you're feeling so far about these components. So either I've got it, yay, type in got it, maybe I need a little more practice, or I'm lost. If you'll just type that in the chat box, let me know how you're feeling about these components we just talked about. Okay, so I'm saying got it, maybe I need more time. Okay, so I'm seeing I saw a couple that maybe I've barely got it. Again, reminder, we have office hours. Yesterday we had awesome office hours. We practiced them to clarify. So moving right along, we are not going to, in effort of time, we're not going to take, not going to give you specific time to complete this section, but in your participant artifact, you'll see that there is a place for you to place your language features that you're going to focus on. So you can go back to the objective and the language expectation you targeted. Place your language features here and then plan for how you're going to explicitly teach that or model it for your kiddos. Someone asked earlier about being able to find language features in the WIDA manual, and I just wanted to show you that you can do that. So here's a sample of the page from the WIDA manual, and Ivana, if you'll put that in the chat box, that WIDA manual, so you have access to it. This is in the sample of the page where they give you that. You can see here they only provide sample language features for the expressive expectations. So you see here are the expressive. Then you see you have your language function there, and you have your language features. So that's a great resource. So now let's put it all together and let's look at how we can create an objective. So here's an example of an integrated content language objective. So students will be able to express is my mode of communication, and it's written in a verb form. So this will likely be express or interpret, one or the other. Then I have my content piece, how magnets interact with iron objects. By connects us to the language function. The language function says describe observations and or data. I added ing to make it read smoothly. So by describing observations and or data, using connects us to our language feature here. So this is one way to write an integrated content language objective. And we are going to practice doing that using our mapping document. So here is the sample of the template. A sample of the template that you can use or you could work with using with your content peers. And we're going to work through, I'm going to walk you through an example of how to complete it using the mapping document, and then we're going to practice together. So here is a sample of a social studies mapping document excerpt. This shows second and third grade. The first thing we're going to do is locate the language expectation that we think is appropriate for our students and their language proficiency levels. So for this, I have targeted being able to introduce an event. Next, I'm going to need to locate my mode of communication. Remember, we said that mode of communication will be expressive or interpretive, and it is located in the coding or nomenclature. So I'm going to go to my sentence frame or my template. Students will be able to express. I've removed the IVE so that it is now a verb. Students will be able to express. Next, I need to choose my content topic. So I need to choose my content standard. For my example, I have chosen this social studies standard that talks about explaining the principles of democracy. Maybe I contacted my content teacher and he said, this is where we are. I'm going to take apart a piece of this language here in the content standard and place it in my frame. And all you need to do is really remove the verb and place the remaining piece of the component of the content objective here. So students will be able to express how principles of democracy have shaped the government of America. Next, I need to find my language function. I'm going to go back to my mapping document and I'm going to find my language function. Here is my language function. Remember, we talked about that language function is the part of the expectation that comes right after the colon. And the earlier portion is the stem. So now I have identified introduced phenomena or events. I'm going to add ing to my verb, and it's going to say introducing phenomena or events. So students will be able to express how principles of democracy have shaped America by introducing phenomena or events. And now the last piece is my language feature. I have placed an excerpt from the WIDA manual here. I'm going to look at my language features here that support that language function that's highlighted in purple. I'm going to decide which ones I think would be appropriate for my students. So I might, if I had a beginning multilingual learner, I might choose pronouns. Prepositional phrases of time is what I selected for my language feature. So I'm going to go back and insert that into my template. At this point, I have an integrated content and language objective. Students will be able to express how principles of democracy have shaped the government of America by introducing phenomena or events using prepositional phrases of time and place. So that is the process using that template. And I saw Ivana answered that yes, those sample ones that you saw me pull up did come from the WIDA manual. Okay. If there are no questions, we are going to practice. We are going to practice one on our own and then come back together and see how we did. So I am placing in the chat box the Jamboard. Again, this is a personal Jamboard, so you'll need to make a copy. Okay, where I pulled the content from, someone's asking. So the content comes directly from the mapping document. It comes directly from the comes directly from right here, grade 2, directly from the mapping document. Right there. Okay, so let's go back to our Jamboard. If you have opened up your copy of the Jamboard, you have, and this is a great way to practice. Some of you said, I think I just need more practice. This is a great, this Jamboard's a great way to do that. So we are going to practice, I'm going to let you practice with a math standard. So take a look at this math standard. Remember, you're going to locate the mode of communication, locate your content standard, language function, and feature. So let's take about 6 minutes to try to create an integrated content and language objective on our own using that math standard. You can type in your text here as you go. So take a minute and try. We'll take about maybe 6 minutes and we'll come back together and see how we did. If you need any support, please just let me know in the chat box.
Chrissy, are you able to put that example back up?
Yes, I will do that. Hey, I'm going to ask us all to come back together. I saw some great questions in the chat box. I'm just going to, sorry, I hate to fast forward on you, get us back to the place we were. I'm sorry. Okay, so the question was asked in the chat box, and Ivana answered it wonderfully. The question was asked, so do I need my WIDA manual? Do I need my WIDA manual, my content standards, and the mapping document all together to create this integrated content and language standard? And Ivana's response was perfect. So as you, depending on your level of comfortableness with a language function and a feature, you may not need all of those materials. As you become more comfortable with the new standards, you may find that you don't need those resources anymore, and you can develop them much more quickly. It's a process. So for this particular training, I tried to create a document that an integrated frame for your objective that used primarily the mapping document with the need to add language features, which the WIDA manual is a resource for that. So hopefully that that helps. So let's go ahead and let's just see how you did really quickly before we get to our wrap up here. So you located your mode of communication. Which was Express. You located the content standard, and you really could have chosen either of these just for my sample one. If you see there, I got rid of the verbs. For my sample one, I chose the fraction, y fractional is equivalent. Then you had to locate the language function. And then you had to choose your language feature, which I chose this one. You could have come up with your own language features. You could have used the WIDA manual, lots of different responses. So hopefully we were pretty successful. So there is a portion of your artifact that a box of your artifact that asks you to take your what you've planned so far and create that integrated content and language objective. We don't have time to allow you to work on that, but again, office hours, if you want to come share, join me from 3:30 to 4:30 today, we can work on that. And so let's just take a moment to wrap up. We have accomplished a lot during our session today. So we've reviewed some of the important pieces of our language expectations, our ELD standards. We have taken a deep dive into our key language uses. We have started the process of planning using our mapping document. And we have had a couple practice attempts at an integrated and content language objective. So we've been busy. So before we leave, I'd like to ask you to do two things for me. The first one is I want us to have a chat blast. I'd like you to think about the tools and the skills that you have gained during this session and how they will be helpful for your integration or your collaboration with your peers. Think about this question and just type your response in the chat box, but don't hit send until you see the icon appear. So type your response. What skills did you gain that will help you integrate your instruction or will help you collaborate with your peers? Take a moment, type it in the chat box, and we'll give you just a few seconds to do that, and then we will blast our responses. Okay, hit send. Let's see what you got from this session. Wonderful, I see objectives, navigating the document, feeling more confident, using artifacts and the Jamboard to help, language expectations integrated, the standards, understanding that connection, which is wonderful, absolutely. So we are all in different places, but we all can have been able to take some really important things away from this session. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. Understanding the objectives. Wonderful. I love the responses. You guys have been great participants. Now I'm going to take you to one more step before we close up our session. And I have found that if we think about a specific action that we want to take and we share it with others, that we're more likely to take that action. So I'm going to ask you to think about an action that you could commit to. So make a commitment to use these new skills in the upcoming year. What actions will you take to either integrate the standards the next school year or to collaborate with your peers? Think about it and go ahead and type and share that in the chat box. What actions will you take next year to either integrate content and language or to collaborate with your peers? See someone talking about sharing with content peers? Absolutely. Become more familiar. Use it for backwards planning, better communication with grade level teachers. Sharing ideas with your ESL team. Ask for more collaboration time. Sharing with content teachers, awesome. I'm super excited for this coming year. Still seeing wonderful ones pop up. With that being said, that takes us to the conclusion of our 2 hours. I'm so thankful for your participation. And we do have a link that I think Ivana is going to put into the chat box for you to, she has put a link for office hours. Thank you. That's where you can join us from 3:30 to 4:30 today to practice more, have discussions, extend our learning. And then Ms. Ivana has also placed in the chat box the PD evaluation. I think these evaluations are necessary to receive your full credit for the sessions. So if you will make sure that you click on that professional development evaluation and complete it for me, so I know how we can make this, this session more beneficial. Thank you so much. You guys have been wonderful participants. And I hope to see some of you in office hours. Ivana, did you want to share anything?
I did. I wanted to remind you that tomorrow is our content teacher day. I just put the registration link in the chat box again. I had one person tell me privately that they had sent it out to all their content partners. So that's awesome. We would love to have our content teachers here tomorrow. And I'll tell you what, if you really want, come back and bring a content person with you. That's like the best way to do it. So we look forward hopefully to see you at office hours, which is 30 minutes from now at 3:30, from 3:30 to 4:30 to dig a little bit deeper if you'd like to. And I just want to thank Chrissy for all the hard work and for the wonderful presentation and the concrete things that you're able to walk away with. Please do. I think there's a slide for the evaluation, but you got the link in the chat box. So please do fill out the evaluation and help us know more about how you enjoyed today, what you got from it, and how we can make it better. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording.